Today we're joined by Catheryne Nicholson, the co-founder and CEO of Bitcoin startup BlockCypher. Catheryne, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric.
Absolutely. So why don't you get us started? Like, what is BlockCypher, and what problem are you guys trying to solve?
Yeah, so BlockCypher is like Amazon Web Services for blockchains. The problem that we're solving and continuously trying to solve is to make it very easy for apps developers to build blockchain applications using our infrastructure. So we expose web services, APIs, webhooks, WebSockets that enable an application to build blockchain applications without having to worry about running Bitcoin D or Bitcoin Core.
Interesting. And since you've been around a minute, how's the company grown since it's been founded, and where are you planning to go in the next year that you can share with us?
Yeah, so we're almost at our 1-year anniversary, which is pretty exciting. We started, thank you. We started out about a year ago with just a very rudimentary address API, trivial, right? In the last year, we've put out some pretty unusual services, such as a zero confirmation confidence factor. Our latest release was a microtransaction API on the blockchain. And we have a whole slew of create transactions, payment API, payment forwarding API, a whole bunch of services that enable basically anyone to build a blockchain application easily. Where we're going with this is essentially we've gone from 0 API calls to we're averaging on the order of 1 million on a daily basis now. And so it's very clear that this is a service that's needed. And judging from the people that we're talking to now versus a year ago, the ecosystem is changing dramatically. So I think a large part is seeing where this all takes us. I mean, we're at new frontiers right now, so it's we'll see. It's very exciting, though.
Yeah, so how did you originally identify this problem sort of in the blockchain development community? What was sort of the origination of the BlockCypher idea?
Yeah, so the original, like if you just wind back the clock a couple years, actually, my co-founder and I, Martindale, were building a mobile web app for education. And we built it as a mobile web app because we didn't want to be beholden to the Play stores because of their 30% fee that they charge, basically the margin. So you have to make a lot of money to even just counteract, to break even, to be in the store. So that's why, and we were fascinated with the technology of HTML5 mobile web. But we kept running into the problem of we still couldn't teleport cash. We just kept running into credit cards. And believe it or not, so I'm a mom, I have 2 kids, and my world revolves around cash and check. And because we couldn't figure out how to solve that, that's how we started delving into Bitcoin. Matthew had mined some, he gave me some, I lost some, and I didn't really fully understand what the ramification was of Bitcoin. He sent me all the research papers also until I downloaded the client and started to run it myself. I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible technology, but there's no way that anybody can build off of this if they have to run this thing themselves. And both my co-founder and I come from an enterprise software platform background. And we kept thinking somebody's going to make a change to it, somebody's going to make it better, and so finally we just decided to roll up our sleeves at the beginning of last year and do it ourselves.
That's great. What is it? You mentioned that you saw a lot of changes sort of since you started over like a year ago now to where we are today. And I think that the Bitcoin ecosystem and sort of the crypto and decentralized space overall, it has gone through this, but I'm interested to hear what you saw from your perspective, not only as an entrepreneur starting a business and looking at the Bitcoin ecosystem, but from a technological standpoint.
Yeah, sure. So it's funny because I was just having this conversation with a journalist over at the Wall Street Journal, whereas a year ago I felt like I was talking to all sorts of freaky people. There's just...
like us, right?
No. Besides yourself, where it just seemed to be on the fringe of I don't know, just very rebellious people, very non-mainstream, if you will. And those conversations have changed dramatically. I mean, we're having conversations with banks now. We're having conversations with huge institutions that are looking at blockchain technology. And so that's what I mean by the conversations have shifted dramatically over the last year.
That's wonderful news to hear about your growth, and especially something we've noticed as well in all of our projects and all of our work, to really see how Bitcoin's been embraced by the mainstream and recognized for its potential power, though I'm sure there's still a lot to be explored there. But what projects do you see right now using BlockCypher, BlockCypher's API in order to build their applications?
Yeah, so where we see applications is it's kind of cool to sit on the infrastructure layer because we get the whole gamut, right? We have of course a ton of wallets. We have the exchanges. We have the point of sales. Those have kind of been around for a while now. Where we're seeing a lot of interest is with developers that have no interest in, so the other thing, let me just roll back also the conversation we were having back a year ago, is we kept hearing nobody is ever going to trust anybody else to run their infrastructure. They wanted to do the whole stack themselves. And now that conversation has changed dramatically. I mean, we are seeing game developers who have no interest at all in either figuring out how to do it or doing or even enabling that person. Like, all they want to do is write games, and they want to enable payments within the games, within the electronic gaming industry. So that also has been a dramatic shift that we have seen over the last year, is people that are specialists in building the applications are actually coming to the table, as opposed to just one-off developers that are just wanting to do everything themselves and still build a business off of, which is, I don't think that's possible. It's just not scalable, and it's very difficult to do. You have to focus on what you're very good at, and there's so many things to do as a startup that it's extremely important to have that laser focus. And it's also, I think, important for the ecosystem as well. I mean, you talk a lot about the centralization versus decentralization, but what we really need now are the specialists. Those, like I mentioned, the game developers that are just good at building games, and now they want to incorporate Bitcoin microtransactions within the game itself, right? So then it changes the whole dynamic of how they can monetize gaming. So those are the conversations that are changing, and that's who the developers that we're starting to see now, as well as the institutions that are coming to the table, whereas they weren't there a year ago.
So outside of clients you're working with, with BlockCypher, what other projects in this space are you excited about, or are you interested in, that maybe kind of, when you read about or you saw a video about, made you go, that's interesting, and really made you think about, what the future is here?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say a single one, because every single time somebody pushes the envelope of what the status quo is, I think it's just really cool. I hope a lot of it comes to fruition. I mean, much of it is theoretical, because as you guys all know, right, there's theoretically perfect, and then there's practically doable. And so it still needs to stand the test of time, but it is extremely interesting, just the alternative, the alt blockchains, the side chains. There's just a lot of creativity that's going on in the whole blockchain technology world, which to me is really exciting in general. As far as like a single one, and of course we all hope for that killer app, right? So that it can get sort of mainstream adoption by everyone. But I think every single person is scratching their head on what form that's actually going to take. And I think applying the lens of the past is not appropriate to what's actually going to develop going forward.
That's a great answer. I don't know if you're even allowed to do this, or if there's some companies that have publicly, talked about using BlockCypher. But what are some of the more interesting things? They don't have to be like the game changers, but what apps have you seen build that really excite you personally?
Well, so our most recent one, of course, as I was talking to you a couple weeks ago, Eric, is our microtransaction API, which is on-chain. This is the first one that's on-chain. And so ZapChain went live with it about 2.5, 3 weeks ago. And so you can tip, and then you can go to any block explorer. You can actually see the transaction live. And that bucks like all the naysayers that said, oh, you can't do microtransactions on the blockchain. The time it'll take too long. The fees are going to be too high. And I love proving people wrong. But it's really cool to me because, like all the microtransactions that have been done to date, you have to push this I believe that is it really being registered on blockchain? Is somebody really accounting for it in the right way? Could this also be just replaced by a monopoly token? Is this just something that's fake? And so that's one of the applications that just went live, in which we proved a lot of people wrong, and you can actually use it and see it register on the blockchain. So I was pretty excited about that, as I told you a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I think microtransactions are absolutely critical for Bitcoin success. There's a lot of opportunities for people to do high volume components and payment channels, but I think the game development space is massive for this, right?
It is.
So if that's exciting you, and you talked a little bit about philosophy and changing things, it sounds either A, you've sort of been infected by the sort of rebellious nature of the early Bitcoiners, or B, you did something maybe previously. Like, is this something that's like aligned with your philosophy? How has Bitcoin changed you? What lessons have you learned?
So yeah, I guess yes, I'm a little rebellious by nature. So I can certainly empathize and with that part of Bitcoin. Something that's been really surprising to me, actually, just parlaying on what I mentioned before, is how many companies are using Bitcoin as a fringe, like as a wrapper, and not truly embracing how revolutionary the technology is, which is the blockchain layer. That has greatly surprised me, because when I first came into Bitcoin, I thought, wow, that's the coolest part. Look at all the things that you can enable and that you can put on the blockchain. It's definitive proof of existence, of the ability to transfer, of when something happened, and the capability to move something in a peer-to-peer decentralized way. And yet, what has surprised me the most is how many people are resorting back to the PayPal model. So it's like what on one side of the mouth you hear, oh yeah, the financial system is completely broken. We're tired of these centralized banks. We're tired of having just all this control and all this fraud and abuse happening. And then on this other side of the mouth from the same players, they're not really using Bitcoin. So it's surprising. It's a little disheartening.
I do think that there are some that are, but they're rare. Yes. And they're rare. Yeah. I know IBM is one of them, and they're working with Ethereum closely, and there's a few others that are really working with it in a different way. But I like what you said there, that they're using it on a superficial level, or on a level that thinks, hey, this is a payment channel and nothing else, versus really what really can happen with it. And I think that's something where, with that being said, that's going to all come with development as well. And what challenges do you think are out there in scaling and making sure that this is able to handle the kind of transactions, and not transaction volume alone, but really just information processing alone in the future? What do you think of that, and what do you think BlockCypher's role will be in that?
Yeah, so there are many challenges, so I'll try to limit it down to just a few of them. Of course, we need to get more developers that are in, and certainly I feel like we're all on a tiny island right now trying to make a landing on a continent, and so there's almost too many of us on that island, and so we need to get more mainstream developers in. I think that is if we do manage to get that catalyst going, then the ecosystem will grow significantly faster. I also think that coming from the Bay Area and from a first world country, we look at the opportunity of Bitcoin in a much different way than the rest of the world. And in looking at where the potential is for Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency or alternate blockchains, that we really do need to push the limits. We do. Why is it a bad thing to push more transactions on the blockchain? Because when you start stretching the capabilities, that's when evolution happens. And so I feel like there's a lot of tentativeness to just put it out there to see, well, what happens? Like, don't try to anticipate what the miners are going to do. Just do it, and then see what happens, and then adjust from there and evolve from there. So it's kind of bucketed by getting fresh eyes in, new use cases, looking at the rest of the world, but also really pushing the boundaries of technology to see where it can go.
I think one of the reasons we kind of asked that question, we're really interested in sort of your views on scalability, was because BlockCypher really does play a very interesting role in allowing the kind of scalability for development with sort of the web services. You described BlockCypher earlier on as being sort of an Amazon Web Services for blockchain development.
Yeah.
And with that, how do you sort of, as a company, sort of convince maybe some of the more people who are more inclined to have a full stack, maybe sort of more personally controlled, decentralized way of development versus using a web service? And do you think there's sort of a way of incorporating decentralized elements into that which would be helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not a one-size-fits-all by any stretch of the imagination, and that's the beauty of this ecosystem, right? There are developers that can do it all themselves and that want to do it themselves, and their use case is totally for that. So, and there are enterprises that they can't do it that way, that they need, you know, the 5.9 reliability, that they need the throughput, the performance and scalability. And if we say only one way is the right way, then that's not the right way to evolve the ecosystem. It's the way to do that is to say, hey, we have to stay open-minded about there's no single way to skin the cat on this. There's multiple use cases, multiple institutions to the mom and pop developer have to be supported in the development of Bitcoin.
So, Catheryne, there's some other things outside of Bitcoin that you do. You sort of, you know, dabbled a little bit in STEM education for women and children, younger girls especially. Can you tell us a little bit about your alternative efforts of some of those things?
Yeah. So, you know, as you can imagine, as you guys all know, right, there are very few women in Bitcoin, and part of the reason is because it's kind of the intersection of not only technology but finance, of which both have a dearth of women. Where I mentioned, I'm a mom, right? I have a boy and a girl, and where I think a large part of the pipeline problem exists is at a younger age. You know, my daughter came home as a second grader and said, my teacher said she's bad at math. I'm like, no, don't say that to her, right? Because fundamentally, you don't want to, most of the elementary school teachers at least in the US, are women, and so you don't want to propagate the philosophy that, oh, you know, girls are not good at math. And so that is one of the things that I'm very passionate about is getting more girls into math and science earlier, because they are all scientists at that very young age, so that they grow up, and then we solve that pipeline issue of bringing more women into tech and finance. It's kind of this long-ranging goal, but it's a multifaceted approach, which has to be addressed not only, you know, on the funding end for the grown-ups, but also on the incoming side for girls.
So how do you think developers in this space can kind of use blockchain technology and other examples of these really cool technologies we're working with to kind of develop better ways of doing education that don't produce these kind of distortions that seem to produce, like you said, the dearth of women or the dearth of men in certain areas?
Yeah, you know, so my kids have no problem picking up any sort of electronic device or any app. They have just a high propensity to adopt things very early, and I would just love to see a whole bunch of kid games come out, because that's really where they engage first, that are educational, that teach not only, you know, math and science, but finance that's rolled up as part of it. I would love to see that. I'm waiting for that to happen, because I know that my kids would adopt it in a heartbeat. I think I would have to pay their allowance in a different manner, but you know, that would be great, because then they would grow up with a cryptocurrency as opposed to, you know, now trying to shove it down consumers on the too old end, if you will.
All right, so what do you think is the overlap between, you know, this helping, you know, improving education for girls and, broadening the sort of a number of people who are coming into the space, and what you're doing at BlockCypher. Is this a case where like BlockCypher may, because you said you want to see these games, is this a case where BlockCypher really targets and helps promote that, or is this something that you think may develop into another project?
I don't know, Eric. It's certainly we're so early right now. It's very difficult to see what the evolutionary path is going to be for this. Personally, I would love to see, I know a lot of moms that are developers, right? I would love to get them building an application that addresses younger age groups that are onboarding them at a much earlier age, and that's only possible if services like BlockCypher, if more of us come to bear, then it makes it much easier for those apps to then come to fruition, because they can't right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's really important for companies and individuals such as yourself even to sort of like be out there and just go try these things, because it really sets a very positive role model for other people who may not, whether it's a gender thing or a disability thing, people who don't necessarily think that they'll be accepted when they come into the community. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as like role models in the community, maybe even point out some other individuals that maybe somebody might want to go see what they're working on? Talk a little bit about your experience as sort of like a woman founder, right?
Oh wow, Eric, that's a loaded question. I admire anybody who's putting it out there. Fundamentally, it's really easy to follow a beaten path. It's much harder to just go down a place where no one's been before and trying to buck the system. So I have huge admiration for anybody that's entering this space now and trying to make a difference and trying to test the boundaries of where we can go with this. So I'm not going to name a single person, but I do think it's very laudable for that to be taking shape. What was your second question?
Sure. Like maybe talk about your personal experience, as a woman, as a female founder, right? Like, have you noticed? Is there a friction in the Bitcoin community? Is that friction greater in the Bitcoin community than it is elsewhere? Do you think? What has your personal experience been?
Yeah, so my personal experience, I'm certainly, I can't speak for all women because I can only talk to what I've experienced, is I think it's been great. I felt very welcomed. I've never felt as if I didn't belong. I have been in tech for a very long time. I've also been in an organization, which is the U.S. Navy, in which there was a lot of very overt gender and racial discrimination. So in comparison, I feel like there's nothing in Bitcoin, right? It's all, it's very warm, it's very welcoming, and and that's why I also would like to encourage more women, because it's frightening from the outside looking in. But I think that once you're in, that everybody is willing to hold your hand, to introduce you to Bitcoin in a very rudimentary and 1 + 1 = 2 manner, and I think that's great. And you don't find that in established industries, because there you're trying to push up against a glass ceiling, whereas like for me as a woman founder, well, the glass ceiling is mine to create, and it's not there. So I can set that culture, I can set that those company prerogatives right from the get-go. Now, having said that, I am desperately looking to hire women. It's really hard to do. I mean, it's hard to hire in Bitcoin in general, but it's even harder to find those women that are willing to jump in. So, it's a double-edged sword. So come, right? If any of you women are watching this interview, contact me. Let me know what your interests are. Talk to me.
We do have some awesome listeners about gender, so definitely encourage that. And I really love that phrase, there's no glass ceiling because you break through it, you don't set yourself one. I think that's the entrepreneurial attitude in general, you know.
Yeah.
And my question for you as a founder would be, what has this experience in the past year of starting BlockCypher taught you? Maybe like one concrete thing and one kind of abstract thing about maybe about life or about yourself.
You experience the highs of emotions and lows of emotions. It's there's nothing like founding a company. I've been the first employee at a startup, and you know, you go in there and there is the security of having an income and being able to leave at any time. As a founder, it's like you cannot leave. You have to make it happen, and there's nobody. You can't turn left or right. You just have to do it yourself. And so those emotional highs and lows are pretty incredible.
That's fantastic. Well, Catheryne, I think we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank you very much for your time. And this one last thing, you have anything you want to share, links, Twitter handles, where can people find you? And you can share it to the audience, and that's it.
Yeah, so I'm at BlockCypher on Twitter and at Catheryne_end for my personal Twitter handle, and we're at www.blockcypher.com.
All right, great. James, did you want to ask one last question?
Yeah, we really enjoyed having you on, Catheryne. What can we see? What can we expect in the future from BlockCypher? Any projects or things coming down the pipeline?
You're going to continue to see very innovative services. I think we really like to push the boundaries of what people say cannot be done. So you can expect that from us.
All right, very exciting. Our guest today has been Catheryne Nicholson of BlockCypher. Thank you, Catheryne.
Thanks. Bye, guys.